Hey everyone, Irene Lyon here. Welcome to this video, to this YouTube channel, and to this world of healing trauma, nervous system health, and all things neuroplasticity. And today I'm going to talk about creativity. I got a question a little while ago on creativity, so I'll read that in a second. But first of all, thank you for being here. If you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, somewhere near this video is a little bell, a little subscribe thing. Click on that just so that you get all of my videos when they come out live. The other thing I'm going to remind you of is to be sure to get on my email list. If you have not yet signed up at irenelyon.com, please be sure to do that because sometimes things get lost in the social media world. So here is the question on creativity. It went something like this. So the question is whether or not you need to be finished healing before you have access to creativity, or if you get access along the way. So there's sort of two parts to this question, or two answers. First of all, this concept that we need to be finished healing, that is a bit of a myth. Now, I'm going to explain what I mean by that. We are constantly in a flux as humans, and in how I see it, we are either in a healing state or in a non-healing state. We're either in what we would call, someone who I've been following lately, Dr. Zach Bush, he calls it pro-immunity. Is our immune system in a pro situation? Is it in a good space? Are we repairing? Are we digesting? Are we eliminating? Is our system ticking over in a way that is for the better and for the positive? Or are we living in a way that is sort of not pro-immunity, con immunity, where we are constantly run down, we're not providing ourselves with what we need, et cetera, et cetera. So this idea that we finish healing doesn't really work in this world of nervous system health and healing. And the reason I say that is because it's infinite. Our capacities as humans, it's infinite. So we have the capacity to learn and grow and create. I'll get into that shortly, I promise. It's infinite, which means that our healing is infinite. Now, let's just say I have a cut on my hand. There's a moment when that is healing, and then there's a moment when it is finished healing. It scabs, the skin gets smooth. Then we could say that that is done healing. But in the grand scheme of the human system, our capacity, our nervous system capacity, the ability for us to differentiate and get better and better and just more refined and more robust and more in flow, that to me is always happening. So to get back to the creativity thing, we don't need to be healed. We do not have to have even regulation on board. And so I'm just going to remind you that there are many people in history, and I'm not going to name all of them, but I'm sure you can think of someone who was famous, who was super creative, who created insane things like music and works of art and literature, but they were messed up. I mean, who cut off his ear? Things like that, right? And so we have to understand that it comes down to, in my opinion, longevity. So a person can be highly creative, very successful, beautiful art, but not be in a healing pro-immunity state. And that is how our systems work. Humans are so complex. Our higher brain will still pump out so many amazing things, even when we are dysregulated. If I go to another example, say the entertainment industry, sadly, we see many, many amazing people, especially comedians, for example, artists, singers, entertainers, actors, who are so amazing. I think of Robin Williams when I say this. And they are so unwell. They have high levels of addiction, high levels of just self-deprecation, low self-esteem, and yet they're brilliant when they're on stage. It's almost like that creativity is a way to cope with all the painful stuff that they don't want to feel. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but if we want there to be longevity with our creativity, I think we do need to work at the nervous system level, healing it so that we're not doing our creativity as a way to avoid the stuff that we don't want to feel. So that's kind of a long preamble to say healing is not necessary to be creative, but I do believe that we want to be in pro healing so that our creativity can last and keep going. Now, there are sort of many facets to creativity. If we think about the human system, I'm going to break this down in a real simple way. We have what we would call the body. We would have what we would call the mind, which we really don't know where it is, but let's just say higher brain kind of thing. And then we have the soul. I've been talking about this a little bit more. I'll post some videos of those below. And my sense is those people who are able to create when they are super dysregulated, traumatized, addicted, I'm thinking about Stephen King, the author Stephen King, and his book on writing, which is his memoir. He talks about one of his better books. I think it was Cujo. He doesn't remember writing that book because he was so drunk the entire time. And I think he was on other things too. He's clean now, but he wrote some amazing things while completely inebriated. And so if we think about the body, mind, soul, we could say that our mind and our soul can still drive amazing creativity. But the thing is that it doesn't last. So that was just another little aside. If we think about the body, however, and the mind, they work best in the long term when there is regulation on board. And our higher brain, our prefrontal cortex, but also our ability to sense our somatic self, it is working best when we are more regulated in our nervous system, when we are not in fight, flight, and freeze survival energies. And I have many videos where I talk about that. I'm not going to get into the branches of the nervous system today in this video, but to say that I believe we can be most creative when we are tapped into our body, when we are tapped into our higher mind, brain interface. And then, of course, those two things connect to our soul, to the environment. We see things in different ways. When I am out for a walk or in my body exercising, I have so many ideas pop into my head. It's crazy. And I think it's because all of my systems are working and I'm connected. I don't have that level of spark when I'm worrying about my to-do list, things I haven't done, et cetera, et cetera. I want to read something from two books. One is from, it's kind of a classic. It's called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, and this is on page 22. It's real short. She writes, "The brain is reached through rhythm, through rhyme, not reason." So the brain is reached through rhythm, through rhyme, not reason. So that's flow. If we think of rhythm and rhyme, there's movement in that, right? There's this flow, this essence, this connection with the environment, with ourselves, not through the reason, not through our brain. Now, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, there are a lot of people who are completely disembodied, aren't in their bodies. Heck, they might not even be able to move them due to paralysis, and yet they have this crazy mind that can still pump out a lot of good stuff. So there are no kind of absolutes in this discussion, but she talks a lot about getting into the body, getting into the emotions, and feeling so that we can create. The other one I want to tell you about, this is another book I have, Twyla Tharp. She is a dancer, a choreographer. She calls her book here, The Creative Habit, Learn It and Use It for Life. Now, this is a little bit of a longer passage, but she says this on page 133. It's one of the exercises. So she says, pick a fight. Creativity is an act of defiance. So this is where we could get into those individuals who are maybe a little shut down, maybe in freeze, and their creativity is pushing them out of that shutdown. It's actually the fight is getting them into that creative juice. So again, nothing wrong with that, but it also comes at a price. We wear ourselves out when we're being creative only in that fight survival energy. But she has some good points here, so I wanted to read this. So creativity is an act of defiance. You're challenging the status quo. You're questioning accepted truths and principles. You're asking 3 universal questions that mock conventional wisdom. Why do I have to obey the rules? Why can't I be different? Why can't I do it my way? Why can't I do it my way? Cue Frank Sinatra. So she then writes, these are the impulses that guide all creative people, whether they admit it or not. Every act of creation is also an act of destruction or abandonment. Something has to be cast aside to make way for the new. I agree with this, and I'm going to get into a little bit more regarding the nervous system and how we're raised in a second. But what she writes there is that when we're being creative, we really are putting ourselves out on the line. We're risking ridicule. We're risking being shamed, being threatened, being told that's stupid, that's not good. For some people who are still stuck in survival, if they were brought up in an environment where they were always ridiculed and shamed and put down, that actually might feed them, right? It's not healthy, but that's what they know. They're wired to wait for, obliteration, to wait for being put down, to feel crappy about themselves, to go into that shame cycle. It's part of their creative process because that's how they were raised. This is where we get into these concepts of neuroplasticity and our wires, how they were grooved when we were young. I did a video on this where I use an analogy of train tracks and how as human beings, when we're healing, to go back to the original question about do we have to fully heal, we don't have to fully heal, but we have to realize that we have these grooves and patterns that we were raised with, where it might be that creativity is fueled by that survival energy. The other way, however, is being creative in a way that's regulated, very embodied. It might be crazy, it might be insane ideas that are still based, however, in solid knowing of this is what I believe in. I'm going to just put this out there, and I'm not going to do it to pick a fight necessarily, but to cause a little bit of a riling up of energy. We could call this being very heretical, right? Just putting out ideas that are really different, but in a way that is solid, that is contained, and that still stays in, we could say, safety, so that we're not being harmed, even if it's verbally, energetically, emotionally. We know this is my work, this is my art, this is the stuff I want to put out, and it might cause a little bit of something, and that's okay. And when that something, when that, let's say, outsider that says that's terrible, that sucks, let's just say that happens, we stay grounded and we stay regulated, and we don't go into survival energy defending our art. This is where it gets tricky, and this is where this is not this linear conversation, because these things swirl. When I put out a video that's maybe a little different, maybe not what people expect of me, those videos often get the most amount of dislikes because it's not what people expect, and it's different. Even though it's something I really deeply believe in, it's not going to match up. And that's okay. You've got to see the likes and the dislikes as completely neutral, right? And so when we're being creative, when we're putting ourselves out on the line, we have to, in my opinion, for it to be a process that we want to keep doing, and keep doing in a way that is healthy, that is regulated, that is contained, such that we want to keep coming back and doing it over and over again. We got to stay grounded in what we would call that social engagement nervous system, that ventral vagal of the parasympathetic, where we're not in fight, we're not in flight, we're not in freeze, but we're still engaging with the world. Because if we shut down, let's say we want to put our art out there, it gets, smashed by the mob, by someone or a group of people who says that's not good, we run the risk of going into survival energy and then stopping that creative work. And then when we stop that creative work, we then kind of stop ourselves and we stop who we truly are. And then the final thing I wanted to just put in here is what I have been talking about a little bit every now and again is the difference between our individuality versus our personality. Now, our personality is something that we create, we make, that is there to basically stay safe in a not so safe environment where we aren't allowed to express ourselves fully. If we go back to the wiring, how our nervous system is wired originally, if we're brought up with safety, secure attachment, all the goodness that forms a juicy, healthy, robust, resilient nervous system, then that's not a problem. We have our individuality, but we also know our boundaries. And usually in such cases, the creativity is just there in the way that it should be for that individual at that soul level. But let's just say, and this is sadly many people in the Western world, we were brought up with a lot of rules, a lot of conditioning, a lot of what we are now calling social engineering. You know, don't do that, don't say this, be this way, da 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 da, don't cry, don't be mad. You get it. I've talked about this in other videos. I won't get into that. But if we are still being driven by that conditioning, by our personality, by literally the mask that we've had to put on ourselves to stay in a family system, we are going to be stunted. Not only our creativity will be stunted, but our biology will be stunted. I've talked about this. This is like the whole thesis for all of my work. If we are not expressing our true emotions and who we are, and we're just living based on that wiring that we had to be for our parents, for our school system, for our friends, for our family, for our spouse, etc. We're just living that. We're not well. We are stuck. We are not in flow. And while we might be successful, while we might be functionally frozen, I did another video on that. I'll definitely post that below. We're not living our true essence. We're not living within that creative spark. And so part of healing the nervous system, part of gaining more regulation back, is getting these expressions out, connecting with our biology, getting back into our body. Many of us, when we get into this work, we realize how disconnected we are from certain emotions, from even feeling our gut, feeling our biology, knowing what we want, what we don't want, how to say yes, how to say no. And so those basic elements of listening to biological impulse, they feed the capacity to be creative. They give us that creative spark from what I've seen. And so when we can get the body and the biology back online and find that internal juice, we start to uncover our true individuality versus that personality that's just been put on so that we can be a certain way and you know, fit in, etc. And so what's interesting, if I go back to that example at the very beginning about certain artists and comedians that we see who are so in their element, in their creative juice, the ones who don't last, the ones who die of suicide and overdose and all these things, while they have this amazing persona and it's very creative, often that's a personality, that's what they've had to do to find that coping, to not feel what's inside. So again, this is all in my opinion, all in my kind of observation. What they're putting out, yes, it's creative, yes, it's funny, yes, it's causing applause and so much fame and fortune, but they're doing it as a coping strategy to cope with the personality that they've had to create to stay alive and safe. But what we know now as we get more into this work is that, as I said again at the very beginning, it has a shelf life. It's not going to last, or if it lasts, it's going to be a real painful, very suffering life. And I don't think we want that. We want to uncover that individuality, that spark. And from my experience, when we get into that, the creativity just flows. There isn't this strain and stress to try to figure it out. When I go to make a video like this, or I write an article, or I have ideas, or I'm brainstorming stuff, it's not hard. It's really easy. When it's hard, when I'm finding that there's something not flowing, usually I'm either disconnected to my system, I haven't been taking care of myself enough, or what I'm working on isn't the right thing to be working on. And I know pretty quickly when I start to work on things because of practice, whether or not something is in flow, whether I need to shift something that's going on in my day, maybe I need to call it quits and say, not today, let's come back to it tomorrow. But having that sensor, that internal sensor that goes no or yes, also comes when we get more in tune with our body. So this video has been a little bit all over the place because creativity is not a straight line, right? So to recap, the question was, do we get our creativity back once healing is finished, or can it come along throughout our healing process? And my answer is it can come at any time. It's just whether or not you want that creativity to be sustainable, you want it to have, a long life, and you want it to be regulated, safe, and in a way, not contained, but there so that we can actually experience it as it's happening, as opposed to that story I shared of Stephen King, who was inebriated writing Cujo. We don't want that. We want to be in the process. Just like when our kids and children are in their process of creating something and playing, we want them to be in it and feel it. It's not about reward or success, but like, how are you feeling when you do it? The flow is there, and just letting that be there. So I will post some other videos to connect with this video. I'll also post the books that I mentioned within this video. And at the end of the day, I know I'm always a bit of a broken record with this, but when we start to grow capacity within our biology, when we start to work at this nervous system level, not only does our health improve, our ability to connect to the world improve, our relationships improve, our boundaries improve, but so does our creativity and our ability to know what it is that we're meant to do as individuals here on planet Earth. Thank you so much for being here and listening to this different video. We will see you next time.